At some point in life, you'll have at least one encounter with grief. Whether it is the death of someone you cared about, a job or career loss, or a terminal diagnosis. And when this happens, the 5 stages of grieving serve as a framework for understanding. Well, it's kinda like a guide on how to grieve. This concept was introduced by a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book On Death and Dying, which is basically a book that talks about the 5 stages of grief, and it also examines the attitudes of the dying and the factors that contribute to society's anxiety over death. But anyway, I would like to go over them and see what these stages are talking about. But before that, it's important to mention that the stages of grief don't usually happen in the same order, nor does everyone go through all of these stages. And now that that's said, first there is the stage of denial. And during this stage, simply denying a certain loss that someone has can serve more as a defense mechanism. And this defense mechanism is kind of more like a cope to hold on to the immediate shock of loss. You might say things like, there is no way this is happening, or this has to be just a dream, right? But regardless of that, this stage tends to happen because denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. And as you accept the reality of the loss and start to ask questions, you are unknowingly beginning the healing process, and the denial is beginning to fade. Next we have anger, because as the initial shock can wear off, it's common for people to become angry. And when being in this stage, someone might point their anger towards themselves, the thing or person that they have lost, maybe even their loved ones, or maybe even God. They might start to say things like, how could this have happened? Why did this happen? And who is to blame? And in Elizabeth's other book, I like to say her first name instead of her last, no disrespect. In her book, Questions and Answers on Death and Dying, she empathizes the need for people to do their best to let those who are in the stage of anger feel their feelings. And try not to take the anger personally, because underneath all the anger hides the pain. Up next, there is a stage of bargaining, where people may try to negotiate or make deals in an attempt to reverse or lessen the loss. How? Well, they might bargain with themselves, saying things like, if only I have done something differently. Or they might go to a higher power with the request, I promise to be a better person if X happens. Or I will never do this again if Y happens. Regardless, it's a way of trying to regain control or prevent the loss from occurring. And it's also common to find ourselves going over and over something that happened in the past and asking a lot of what if questions. Because what if indeed I did not go outside when it was raining? Moving on, there is depression. Now, just to clarify, depression in grief is not a sign of mental illness, but a natural response to the loss. It involves deep sadness, regret, fear, and uncertainty about the future. This stage is marked by a sense of emptiness or despair as the person begins to understand the extent of the loss. And all jokes aside, because I'm trying to be funny right now, but please don't take this lightly. This pain can be very intense and can have lasting effects for over months, maybe even years. But then, lastly, there is acceptance. And in this last stage, you begin to come to terms with the reality of the loss. Now, acceptance is often confused with being alright or okay with what happens, but this is not really true. This stage is about accepting the fact that what happened, and recognizing that this new reality is real. Or, in other words, it is what it is. And who knows? You may find ways to move forward and adjust to life without the person or situation that you have lost. Maybe you might even find ways to connect or hold on to memories of what you have lost. Or maybe you learn from it and potentially grow from the experience. But nonetheless, despite of whatever happens, we cannot do so until we have given ourselves time to grieve. And so, in a conclusion, some key points to remember is that grieving is a unique and personal experience. Not everyone goes through these stages in the same way or order. Some people may revisit certain stages multiple times, maybe even adding more stages to the grieving process. And in the end, to sum it all up, with these stages, the hope would be that people gain more knowledge of, how to grieve in a healthy way, so that you can be better equipped to cope with loss and life. And with that I say, thank you for watching. Take care. Hypocrisy has a pretty big meaning to it, and although this is the best definition I could find, to simplify it even more, it is when someone is not practicing what they're preaching, which not only makes you seem stupid, but also quite silly. Imagine that someone was ranting about how there should be equal opportunities for everyone, but when asked, was not willing to give up their position for a more equal society. Or imagine a pastor who was preaching about, well, what these two would have in common is that they would appear to be hypocrites. Oh, and if you yourself look at these people, judging them, saying, oh wow, what a bunch of hypocrites. If you were to take a look in the mirror, you would realize that everyone is a hypocrite, which would make you a hypocrite for saying that everyone is a hypocrite. There was an ancient Greek philosopher called Plato who believed that rulers should be trained as noble liars to keep society stable. So if someone were to ask, "Oi, ruler sir, kind ruler sir, how is the war going?" Plato believed that lying would be more effective for a more stable society than the truth. Similarly, in the book The Prince, written by Niccolo Machiavelli, which is literally a book about how to acquire power, create a state and keep it, suggests that leaders should act as hypocritical pretenders to gain and keep the power that they have. And I'm not saying that you should do this, I'm just stating out the facts. And there was a study being done by Andreas Kappas and Tali Sharad, and they found that people who publicly committed to a moral standard were seen as more trustworthy and influential, even if they failed to follow through on their commitment. Take a look at the former president of the United States, for example, Bill Clinton. He once emphasized integrity and family values in a speech, but was later involved in an affair which contradicted all of those commitments. But still, to a lot of Americans, this man is an icon. And another study led by social psychologist Mark Leary found that those who criticize a behavior publicly are sometimes more likely to do it themselves, yet still seen as more moral and trustworthy than those who stay silent. So, in other words, people who are preaching about and seem to follow moral standards are more likely to gain more trust and influence than those who actually do it. And if you want to know what a typical hypocrite looks like, well, they have a tendency to claim moral high grounds, pretending that they have a standard, and they declare themselves committed to some virtue, but then just slide whatever they want in and out of that category. Honesty is good and dishonesty is bad. But when I don't tell the truth, I'm simply being honestly tactful. You know what I mean? But when you don't tell me the truth, you're simply a liar. This type of person acts one way in public and another way in private. They criticize actions they secretly do for themselves. Now, the opposite of a hypocrite has something to do with what Charles R. Swindoll once said, and it goes like this. Honesty has a beautiful and refreshing simplicity to it. No ulterior motives, no hidden meanings, an absence of hypocrisy, duplicity, political games, and verbal superficiality. As honesty and real integrity characterize our lives, there will be no need to manipulate others. And with that, I'll say, in conclusion, when someone teaches people not to do something, I think that there is a difference between someone actively wanting to quit, like for example alcohol, while teaching others that it's not okay to do it, than when you just don't care about quitting and preaching about, not doing it. And if you don't care about quitting, well then I cannot really defend you there. And with that, thank you for watching. Take care. While experiencing some negative thoughts throughout your day-to-day in life is a normal thing, imagine if this constantly were to happen for longer periods of time than is normal. And I came across an interesting point on this subject, which is called rumination. And rumination is when you repeat the same negative thoughts as a loop in your mind. For example, if there was a war going on between country 1 and 2 in, let's say, the year 1950 till 51, well, then the consequences of the war would not be there for just 1 year. Before this war, people would be terrified and would keep thinking about war. And especially afterwards, after it was all over, it wasn't over. Physical trauma, abuse of substances to compromise for these negative thoughts, etc. Why did I mention this? I thought it was cool. Moving on. There are different kinds of negative thought patterns, to which I'm pretty sure that most people have experienced most of these at some point in life. For example, you can have all or nothing thinking. Either I will make sure that it will go perfectly, often it doesn't, or I failed 100%. There is emotional reasoning. You basically confuse facts with thoughts. I feel like I'm a bad parent, therefore I must be a bad parent. Even though your children say the opposite and they are all, I don't know, millionaires. Catastrophizing. This is when we expect the worst to happen. For example, if you make a small mistake at work, you might start thinking that you'll get fired, even when there is no real evidence for it. And there is also a certain mindset that I heard of that is pretty popular by people that's called a negativity bias, which is the tendency to pay more attention to the negative things than the positive. Here, more weight is being given to negative experiences over neutral or positive ones. And it can cause us to dwell on the negative while there would also be a lot of positive if you just paid attention to it. And now on why repeating negative thoughts can be harmful. They can contribute to social anxiety, depression, stress, low self-esteem, they suck, pessimistic, and they are negative. And by learning how to, well, I wouldn't say never have negative thoughts ever again, that's not really possible, but by learning how to identify these thoughts and be able to manage it, it allows you to, well, not having to experience this all the time. And that brings us to the term thought reframing. And to explain what this means in an utmost professional way, you basically change the way you see things. For example, Sisyphus. And to go over him again real fast, Sisyphus is a character out of the Greek mythology who was punished by the gods to repeatedly push a rock up a hill for all eternity. Because when he gets the rock to the peak, it just rolls down again. But instead of looking at the tiny little bits of negative of the situation, he reframed his perspective and overcame. Technically, I hate doing this became, if I enjoy doing this, the gods will be displeased. Therefore, did I explain that well? I don't even know. By reframing your thoughts, you can put your focus more on the positive instead of the negatives. It makes you more appreciative, and overall, if the glass of water contains 50% of water, you might as well see it as half full than as half empty. Why not? And in conclusion, what was this video about? Who knows? Here is a picture of someone beautiful. And thank you for watching. Take care. A daily thought that people might find themselves asking is, what's the meaning of life? And yes, this video will get deep, even when you have done everything according to this certain script that has been given to you. Go to school, get good grades, get a good job, etc. But as you grew older, you became more conscious of the cycle you found yourself in. Wake up, go to work or school, eat, sleep, and repeat. While one day thinking, is this it? This can get to a point in where you don't really care anymore about going outside, representing yourself well, and keeping in touch with others, because in the end, it has no meaning. But while you can look at it like this, you can also look at it from a different angle and say, in the end, it has no meaning. So what? And that brings us to the philosophy of absurdism. Albert Camus was someone who contributed greatly to the exploration of absurdism after publishing The Myth of Sisyphus. More on this later on. And absurdism is the philosophical theory that the world is irrational and meaningless. It states that trying to find meaning leads people in conflict with the world. Our lives are built on chaos, and this is the only thing that we can rely on. That's what absurdism is about. Life not having an objective meaning. This philosophy is unique because instead of looking for an answer, absurdism declares that you can't make sense of any of this. And that's fine. It doesn't really fight to tell you the meaning of all this, but rather it just states that there is no meaning, which is fine. And with that, the statement, there is no meaning to life. So what? Because when you try so hard to make sense of the universe, you'll become frustrated trying to make sense of the universe. Imagine trying to make sense of the universe. But fortunately for you, there is another view. Rather than the nihilistic view of it, there is the absurd view. One side teaches that life has no meaning, you don't matter, nothing matters, etc. And the other, well, kind of the same. But instead of saying you're right, in despair, it says, so what? Just create one. A meaning, that is. The philosophy doesn't let you give up on life. Instead, it helps you find your subjective purpose. But let's go back to this man, Albert Camus. He said, and I quote, "I don't believe in God, and I'm not an atheist." His point being that it's impossible to prove God exists. But it's also impossible to prove that he doesn't. Besides, all social systems, be it religion, political structure, or communities, fail to explain the genuine mystery of human life. But their existence might make this existence a bit more comfortable. Anyway, Camus was one of the most important absurdist thinkers, and while he never believed in any kind of absolute religious or philosophical morality, he did believe that people should be compassionate, dedicated, and loyal. All lessons he learned from, you guessed it, sports. Plus, in Camus' book, The Myth of Sisyphus that he wrote, he explained absurdism using this reference. Oh, and real fast, Sisyphus was a character out of the Greek mythology, who was punished by the gods to repeatedly roll a rock up a hill for eternity. Because when he gets the rock to the peak, it just rolls down again. And with this, Sisyphus will be described as a metaphor for our struggles against the absurdity of life. For Sisyphus, taking his own life wasn't an option. So the only way to rebel against the gods is to enjoy pushing that rock. And with this certain change in attitude, the joyful acceptance of the struggle, the individual gains their identity, the meaningless gains a meaning, and with that, the philosophy of absurdism. But, what now exactly? Be a rebel, Camus says. Give meaning to the meaningless, instead of seeing it as, oh, life is not meaningful, oh, we just live to die. A certain philosopher out there advocates that we should rebel against the meaningless by simply giving it meaning. For example, if you've ever looked at a piece of art in a museum, but it didn't mean much to you, you would perceive it as meaningless. But after you have read the description, suddenly, you look different at the art. It suddenly calls some kind of emotion, some kind of increase in value. It has gained meaning. In conclusion, what is the meaning of life? Honestly, who knows? But while life can suck, a certain philosophy out there suggests that we have the power to create our own meaning and purpose. And so instead of searching for an ultimate truth or universal meaning, focusing on finding meaning in the small moments of everyday life is worth the meaning of life. Or something like that. And yeah, thank you for watching. Take care. I got once accused of being envious of someone because they were talking to each other a little bit too long without me, but that simply wasn't true. I was jealous, and while the concept of jealousy and envy are almost exactly the same, they do differentiate from each other. Because envy is when you want what other people have. Simple as that. While jealousy is when you are worried that someone is trying to take what you have, but not in a robbing way. Or, well, maybe. And it typically brings feelings of suspicion, the fear of loss and distrust, while envy involves feelings of inferiority, longing, and the desire to possess what another has. Though, to be honest, most people don't really care about the difference, including me, but I just kinda had to say it, so yeah. Moving on, it is said that jealousy is more common in certain professions where competition is a big thing, like being a professional athlete or like a salesman, and will often experience an increase in jealousy whenever their peers in the same field succeed in something. And the thing is, you probably don't even want to feel ill will against your peers succeeding, but it just is what it is. Now, is jealousy a bad thing per se? Well, it kind of depends on how you see it. For example, if someone asks where you were the last couple of days, someone might say, you know, that's pretty controlling and insecure of you to ask. But in some cultures, this is actually viewed as a sign of love. Instead of getting named insecure, it's more like getting seen as wanting to protect something that is important to you. while fearing that it might potentially leave. And while a normal level of jealousy can be a healthy thing, too much of this can become a little crazy. It might lead to trust issues, possessive behaviors and conflict, and sometimes even people going their separate ways. And what I've also heard is that it is possible for people to use jealousy as some kind of weapon to destroy their opponents. Okay, maybe not that, but almost in a way to try and make someone jealous on purpose with the goal in mind to I don't know, maybe to get back at them or to prove a point. Who knows? Anyway, what can help against jealousy? That would be very interesting to mention indeed. But in conclusion, I have heard of cases in where jealousy can also motivate people to improve themselves because some people use the fear of getting replaced or losing something precious as a driving force to achieve their goals or enhance their personal attributes. So again, I don't know if you can really say that jealousy is in and of itself a bad thing per se. But with that, I think that's about it. And thank you for watching. Take care.